Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy New Year! It's B Show Brian with Halloween 365, first show of 2022. First one that's going to be for the year on YouTube, and it's going to be available on all podcast platforms fairly soon. New beginnings. I wanted to wrap up 2021 and start off with a new beginning with what I think is the hottest horror property of 2021, which is Midnight Mass. That's what we're talking about here today. Now, the music, before I get started, is Reusch, Rueschche, I think I'm pronouncing that right. The Church, by music by Reusch Sounds. You can find them on YouTube. They have some royalty-free stuff that you can use for background music in your YouTube projects or video games. But that's the music to back this up tonight. And hey, it's me, B Show Brian. First time in 2022. I wanted to say something before I started. Thank everybody that signed up throughout October for this channel, because there was quite a few. I know there's not a ton of subscribers compared to some other channels that are, fairly popular. But in this case, with the numbers that we have, we were up like 23 or 24% just in the month of October alone. So thank you for checking out the channel. I know there's been a lot of people who've been surprised that some of the videos haven't had higher hits than they have. I think it just comes with time, and I haven't really been that consistent with what I've been doing here. So just to give you a heads up, for those of you who signed up, I know you like the horror history videos. I know people have told me they're really good. Unfortunately, I don't have as much time to do those on a regular basis like I originally intended with the channel. So what we're going to do is pivot. I'm going to try to do a regular podcast weekly or bi-weekly as time permits, because I do have another podcast, Break the Apocalypse, which I do with John Draper, formerly of Wrestling Soup, a few years ago, Synthetic 16, the band, and Shaheen of Planet Mondo. Check out his podcast as well on YouTube. But housekeeping over with. I'm going to try to do these as much as possible, and also every once in a while release maybe a different type of podcast, a different type of movie review, or something outside of horror, because I'm way too... I don't know if it's ADD. I can't stick to one thing. I'm all over the place. I start doing, like, I watched horror movies all through the summer, really all throughout the year. I was watching horror movies all year pretty consistently. We talk about them on Break the Apocalypse quite a bit. And it got to the point where, like, I need a palate cleanser, and I think mostly through October, I didn't watch much horror. I was really busy with work. That's another thing that's really inhibited my time as far as editing is concerned. I love podcasting. I really love editing video together to tell a story. Unfortunately, time only permits me to do that a couple times a year now. So if that's upsetting, I apologize. If you still like my point of view and the things I bring to horror films and this discussion and commentary, stick around, because I'm going to do this more often, or at least attempt to. While we're here, I want to get started on Midnight Mass. But you can check me out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Letterboxd, all at B Show Brian. Nothing at Halloween 365 yet. I mentioned check out Break the Apocalypse. We're on all platforms. Also on Patreon for bonus shows every week and a couple times a month. And also I want to shout out other horror groups, the Horror Nerd Discussion Group, Red River Podcast, our buddy Sam, and the Necromaniacs Podcast with Mike and Mike. So check them out if you're horror-centric and that's what you like to get into as far as podcasts are concerned, and group discussions. Now, the matter at hand, Midnight Mass. Back in September, or October, I don't remember which one, I believe September, I had a lot of people hitting me up. A lot of my friends who aren't necessarily horror movie fans, who were telling me about this great series that was on Netflix, and it was called Squid Game. And I'm like, all right, I'll check it out. So I checked out the first episode, and it was all right. I mean, nothing really groundbreaking. Stuff we've probably seen before, especially people who are familiar with Asian cinema. The first episode was pretty good, nothing outstanding. And then the second episode dragged, and I thought, I get it, but what's everyone really raving about? And then John Draper of Break the Apocalypse started texting me about check out Midnight Mass. He said, B-Show, you're going to love Midnight Mass. It's right up your alley. And I'm like, all right, cool. And I had no expectations for this going in other than John saying it was good, and that's usually a pretty good recommendation. So then I check out Midnight Mass, and I was completely blown away. And the fact that people that I know of who had talked about Squid Game being awesome had talked about Midnight Mass, but for some reason it hadn't gotten the attention on the web that I had seen in group boards, Facebook, wherever. I'm rusty. It's been a while. But it didn't really get the attention that Squid Game was getting. And I really didn't understand why. To me, it seemed like even more taboo a subject. Squid Game was, social hierarchies and capitalism and blah, 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 blah. Like, we've seen that a lot. This dealt with religion, which I figured would have some people's panties in a wad. I mean, I remember senior year, I had a homeroom class. My buddy Andy, shout out to Andy Ruff. My buddy Andy, who podcasted with me in the past on the B Show podcast, always got a tickle out of the story I told about my senior year in homeroom. My homeroom teacher, government teacher, was talking about this terrible movie that they had seen, and they went to the video store on Easter to rent a religious movie, and it had great reviews and was supposed to be very funny. And then they go with their daughter and son-in-law. They get this movie. They take it home. They pop it in the VCR. And yes, when this story was told, we were still watching movies on VCR sometimes, but it was in the DVD age. And all of a sudden, the most filthy, disgusting, blasphemous movie comes on. And it was Dogma. And if you've ever seen the movie Dogma, and if you lived through the 90s, you know that that movie was a hot button amongst religious people. It's I think it does a good job of poking fun at religion, but bringing up good points. But that was not seen at all by anyone from those circles. They just, this is blasphemous, this is terrible, how dare you question? Which leads me right into Midnight Mass. So I'm going to stop you right here if you haven't seen the series. I will assume from this point on you've seen the series. So if you haven't, go stream it. I don't think it's going to take you long to get through. Most episodes are about 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Some are a little longer. And there's 7 episodes. So it's a really quick watch, especially if you get into it like I did, not to kind of lead ahead too much here. But from here on out, you've been warned. Spoilers away. Now, I'm also going to warn you, I'm not the type of person who reviews movies by saying, the cinematographer was this person, and they used this color palette. That's fine if you're more technically inclined. I'm more of a generalist. I'm more of a 1,000-foot view than a, down in the weeds type of guy, although we dip down from time to time. I'm more overall story, overall impressions, feeling, emotion, character type of person. So I'm not going to go through and list every detail that happened. I'm not going to spoil every little detail of the series. I'll let you go and watch. But from here on out, I do want to stress that this will be full of spoilers if you have not seen it. So go check it out. I'll wait right here until you're done. All right, you're back. First of all, it's a small fishing town, I believe, in Maine. They call it the Crock Pot because I believe it's called Crock something or other. Again, I'm not going to go detail for detail on this. I'll let you explore it at your leisure. But basically, it's a small fishing town that's dying. Riley, who is thought to be the main character, more on that later, goes off, and he's a venture capitalist, and he has a DUI and kills someone and goes to jail, and then he comes back. When he comes back, the old priest who had gone off, who was ailing, had gone off, to a trip to Jerusalem. And a young priest came back in his place and said, I'm not replacing Monsignor Pruitt. My name is Father Hill, is it? Father Joe Hill? That seems way too much like a Hollywood name. But he said, I'm Father Joe Hill. Monsignor Pruitt is convalescing. He's getting better. I'm not replacing him. Please, you're not getting a new priest. But I'll be here for the time being. The diocese wanted to make sure you had a priest. And it's at the same time that Riley's coming back. And Riley's being pressured by his parents, who are very devout Catholics, and going back to Mass and being a part of the church. So he comes back. All of a sudden, this weird shit starts happening. People start healing certain ailments. Certain miracles start to happen. Again, I'm going to talk about the show. I don't want to spoil everything. But these weird signs of some sort of miracle start happening, and they all coincide with this new priest coming into town. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. Some people in the town start turning on each other. I don't want to do a whole synopsis on this, but I feel like I need to talk about it. But basically, the priest was Monsignor, who reveals, and people start figuring this out, that he was old, now he's young. And it coincides with other people in the community being healed or regressing in age, things like that. So these miracles start happening, brought on by this guy. Everyone's trying to figure out how this is happening. And then it's revealed that Monsignor was attacked by a vampire, and based on the description of this creature, sees it as an angel. And Angel restored his life and his health and his mind because I believe he had dementia. And he brought this creature back to the island. And that's what the whole story is. And then there's the faith versus the people who don't have faith, and the healed versus it. Just everyone. Okay, I'm gonna back up here. My brain sometimes goes faster than my mouth. So that's where we're at. Again, if you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If not, go check it out. I thought it was incredibly inventive. I'll be honest, when I first started watching the film, episodes 1 and 2, it kind of felt like 2 or 3 Stephen King films kind of mashed together. I think one was Storm of the Century, where this demon comes, or Satan, I believe it is, Lenoge. He comes in during this big storm, and they have to sacrifice some of the children. And it felt a lot like this. Isolated community off of the mainland. Very religious in nature. Storm of the Century was as well. But then as the story started to play out, and I pieced some things together, which I'll get to that in a minute, I really found myself just wanting more. I was addicted to this show. It's a good thing it was 7 episodes, because I wouldn't have slept much of November or December if that was the case. But in this case, I really became addicted to the show early on because it was so goddamn good. It was inventive. The characters were good. I'll get to this. But I ended up staying up till 2, 3 in the morning most nights, just try to get all the episodes in within the first week I was watching it, because it was amazing. And I thought we were going to talk about this more on Break the Apocalypse. We never really did. Not in much detail. So I feel comfortable doing that now. We had our opportunity. It's passed. It's now January 2022. I think enough time has passed. We can talk about our impressions of this. So from the middle of the show through the end, I was hooked. The climax, the midnight mass, it culminates with the Father revealing everything to the people, including the angel, on the Easter Vigil. So it all dovetails in with religion, right? It's Easter Vigil. Here, it's this angel. He'll restore you, and that's what you've been. And he's been dropping blood in the communion, all that stuff. You guys know what I'm talking about here. I went from intrigued to hooked, and in retrospect, this is the best horror property of 2021. I saw Candyman, I loved it. I saw Halloween Kills, I loved parts of it, didn't like other parts of it. I watched part of Squid Game, it was okay. I mean, I've watched a lot of horror this year. Possessor was really good. This, to me, was just blew everything out of the water. Everything was in plain sight. All of the details. Everything you needed to know about this movie. This is one of the series. I keep calling it a movie. Part of the series that made it so special is that all of the details you need to put everything together are in plain sight. For example, when the priest comes, the first mass, he's wearing a gold cape. I forgot what they call it. It's been a while since I've been in Catholic school. But he's wearing a gold robe. And Beverly, whatever her name is, the bitchy, stereotypical I'm better than you because I go to church all the time character ends up becoming like his right hand eventually in his plot. Says this is for feast days. That robe is for feast days. And she kind of undermines him a little bit. And he says, I didn't think anyone would notice. But at the same time, I couldn't find the green one, so I just wore it. I didn't think anyone would know. Now, on its face, it seems innocent. if you go back after the fact and look at that, it's like he knew exactly what the fuck he was doing, because that at that time, on that day, a big storm rolls in, and he wears the robe on a feast for a feast day, and then that night there's a terrible storm and all these cats wash up on shore dead, necks broken, drained of blood. Now, if you're a horror movie fan, you know exactly what's going on. There's a vampire, and in fact, Riley, the main character at this point, sees this man out during the storm on the beach, standing there walking, and he says he's wearing Monsignor's hat and trench coat. So he thinks it's Monsignor who's come over and gotten lost in the storm because he's not all there. So Riley runs out calling after Monsignor. That was our first view of the vampire. So we know there's a vampire. Who is it? Is it the priest? Is it Monsignor? We didn't know at this point. But the robe was for a feast day, and this was the inaugural feast of the angel in his new surroundings. Then later on, during that day, Riley's parents walk up to the priest and say, "You haven't said, no one said that translation of the Mass in 10 years." So it gives the indication that he's doing it the same way Monsignor did it. Again, on its face, he says, "Oh, I think it's blah, blah, blah." He gives some nondescript explanation that makes sense at the time. But again, going back and looking at it, it's like, that motherfucker, he was crafty. He was always covering his tracks. You could see there, oh yeah, it makes sense. He's Monsignor. He's doing it the old way. And part of this is getting back to the roots of faith. The new church, but getting to the discipline of it. And as we enter into this new covenant, like Moses had, like Jesus had, this is the new covenant that we make on our church here. Very, very rooted in the disciplines of Catholic dogma. But again, if you look, even Father Hill's photo, there's a photo in the house where the priest is staying. Not Riley, sorry, Joe Hill. But you can see Monsignor's picture in the house at some point. And I think Joe, not Father Joe, maybe, but Joe the drunk notices the picture before anyone else does. He thinks stuff seems kind of messed up. Again, I'm just giving some pieces out there of the little Easter eggs that I saw. And also Riley, when they're doing their AA sessions, the first time the priest meets Riley, Father Hill, he meets Riley for the first time. He's not familiar with him. He's noticed him sitting back and not taking part in communion, but he doesn't know anything about him. But then somehow when they do AA, or the Narcotics Anonymous, whatever it was, the anonymous group, he somehow knows about him, and Riley picks up on this. And the priest kind of covers and says, "Oh, Monsignor told me about you." Well, if you remember back to the first episode, that's not true. So as things go on, it becomes more and more obvious that not only is shit not right, but then when you figure everything out, it's like, wow, okay, this all kind of makes sense. What that does is it allows things to develop. I kind of get ahead of my notes here. It allows things to develop to where you can see what could happen in the future. And then when it finally does all play out, you agonize through the results of what's happening. And it's beautiful. It's classic Hitchcock. The lesson of Hitchcock and suspense in films is, imagine four guys playing cards at a table. They're talking about baseball, football, wrestling, movies, whatever. And then we, as the audience, we interspersed with the scene of them playing cards, we see a bomb under the table. And we see that bomb's counting down. And we'll see them playing cards. They have no idea. And then we see the bomb. And then they're playing cards. And then the bomb's counting down to 15 seconds. And then they're playing cards, and it's 10. And we see that the bomb is going to go off. And there's that sense of tension that starts to build. Like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then at some point, someone kicks the bomb and, it turns off the timer. And it's a dud, or it doesn't go off. Or they get up and leave the room and everything's okay. The bomb doesn't go off. That is exactly what happened here. Except the bomb, in a way, the bomb went off, but it was a part of the story, not the end of the story, which makes sense. And I'm not going to get into all that right now. But it's a lot of movies that I watch, even movies that I've enjoyed in 2021. They're spoon feeding you information. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. Oh, this happened. This is happening now. This movie planted a lot of seeds. And if you're a genre fan, you picked up on some of them. They gave you little tidbits along the way. But it was enough to where you can kind of see something happening and developing enough to build tension without completely blowing everything. So, taking a step back, some people say the story dragged a little bit, especially toward the middle of the series. But to me, that's when they were really taking the time to develop that story, to plant those seeds, and to develop the key characters and the issues between them. Like Joe the drunk, Bev the bitch, and Lisa the wheelchair-bound girl. It's revealed that Joe, on a drunken stupor, shot Lisa and paralyzed her, which is why she's in the wheelchair. Bev never liked Joe. Joe never liked Bev. She thinks she's better than everybody, and I had plenty of teachers that acted like Bev back in the day, and it's like they see themselves as a saint, as an authority, as the priest, as the deacon, whatever the authority figure it is, and they take it upon themselves to act, which happens in this show. And throughout, Joe starts out as a drunk, and he's a little sympathetic, but not really. And by the time his story really arcs, like, you really want Joe to get better. And I'm going to expound upon this in a few minutes, but but you wouldn't, if you had 90 minutes to tell this story, and I mentioned Stephen King earlier, if you had 90 minutes to tell this story, you would not have been able to do it as well as was done, because the character development or the story would be rushed, and you wouldn't be able to get any of this in. There's also the subplot of the sheriff and his son. The sheriff is or was Muslim, maybe agnostic now. The son is a Muslim. With everything going on and all the miracles, starts getting crazy. Or curious, crazy. With all the crazy stuff going on, he gets curious. With all the curious stuff going on, he gets crazy. And he starts getting interested in what's going on and believing and being a part of the community, as opposed to his dad, who is still practicing. That's right, he was a practicing Muslim, because they had the prayer mats and were praying during certain times. And then he also starts to have issues, the sheriff, who's widowed, with Bev Keane, I think that's her name, who is the bitchy right-hand woman to the priest. Then there's also Riley and Aaron. So Riley, I mentioned, was again, I'll assume you saw it, but we're going through this just for the sake of discussing the film and everything. Riley's backstory was he went off, he got into trouble, he came back. Aaron was much the same way. She partied, she moved from place to place, she's pregnant, she came back. And they also kind of dovetail with the priest. Not necessarily Aaron, but Riley. And the thing I picked up about these two, Aaron and Riley, is that it's so reminiscent to a conversation we just had this week on Break the Apocalypse this past week, where if you stay within your bubble, where you came from, same people, same influences, there's a certain groupthink that happens. And if you really want to broaden your horizons and become a more well-rounded person, you have to step outside of that community. You have to go to another city. You have to go to a college. You have to work somewhere else. You have to make friends through message boards and similar hobbies and things like that, music. Because what happened, which is illustrated in the show, is Aaron and Riley went off, they made mistakes, they became more aware of the wiles of the world, I guess, in their misadventures. They were educated in the way the real world is, whereas everybody else who stayed on the island was the same exact way. There's differing people, and there's problematic people, and there's people who are just good everyday folk. But everyone goes to the church. Everyone works in this town. Everyone stays here forever. Everyone thinks very much the same way, and it's a very easy plot device for the priest to come in and start this process of converting people right, to vampires and to fulfill his new covenant, because everyone in the town goes along with everything because that's what they know, that's what they do, everyone does it, and they all follow the shepherd like sheep. Overused term, but we're tying this in with religion. So in that way, it was very much, to me, it's almost like, and it's so layered, which is, again, so good. And maybe why this resonated with me so much, being someone, and here I am saying hands folded, someone who went to Catholic school, because Riley and Aaron are almost like Adam and Eve in a way. Whereas, everyone here is staying in paradise, and that's the thing. I live in a small town. Everyone thinks their small town, if they drink the Kool-Aid, everyone thinks their small town is the greatest. A restaurant pops up. Oh, this is the greatest restaurant ever. Oh, this one's been here for 30 years. It's like, no, the food sucks. It's just what you ate growing up. I never forget Stanley's Kielbasa. Everyone in North Toledo eats Stanley's Kielbasa because that's the Polish butcher meat market in North Toledo. That's what everyone got their kielbasa from for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'll never forget when I went to my in-laws' house and I had kielbasa, whatever, for the first time. I was like, Jesus, I never realized how bad Stanley's kielbasa is. No disrespect to Stanley's. I mean, there's a lot of people that like it, but to some extent, we're shaped by the experiences that we grew up with. And if you don't exit that bubble, you're never going to grow as a person. And in this case, these people were opening themselves up to getting hoodwinked by this person who was someone they trusted, who was under the influence of someone of nefarious means. But again, just that character development, you can't get all of that. Joe, Bev, Lisa, Sheriff, his son, Riley, Aaron, the priest. You can't get all that story development or the character development in a 90-minute film, or even a Marvel film that's 3 hours long. Shit, Endgame was 3.5 hours long, and it took them, 12 movies to set those dominoes up? This was able to set all the dominoes up, put them in position, and then flick them over, and then over the last few episodes, they just started falling. And it was perfect. So some people say it took a little long, and I know that was long-winded to get through with the characters, but I think it illustrates just how deep this series was in that respect. Wet my whistle here. One thing that I really respect about this series as well is it had the balls to kill its darlings. That is a Stephen King note. I'm sure other writers have heard that before. Stephen King, there's a book called On Writing by Stephen King, and one of the tools in his toolkit, I believe he said, was the ability to kill your darlings. Kill your darlings. And if you don't feel comfortable, put the subject matter down if you're writing and come back to it later when you're not so emotionally invested. Killing your darlings. For those of you who watch the show, Joe the drunk. He was seeing this great character arc, and if these people, like Father, like Bev, if all these people are the great, holy, pious people they think they are, or they project they are, they would want to continue that no matter what. But Joe is killed, and he's fed to the priest, Monsignor, because of everything that's going on. And there's a great scene, again, and most of you, I keep saying, I'm going to stop saying this now, I promise. But those of you who've seen it know, I believe Joe falls back and hits his head, and the priest grabs him, and they walk in, and he's just like chewing on the back of Joe's head. It's like, oh my God, Joe, he was a drunk. He's trying to reform. He's showing some wisdom. And helping Riley along in his struggles. Bev Keane really has it out for him and poisons his fucking dog. Again, every detail mattered. The poisoning of the dog would foreshadow everything to come later. But you see Joe going through this transformation. He's forgiven by Lisa. And you pull for this guy. And that actor, to me, is one of the most sympathetic male actors of this current time that I've seen. And I'm sure there's other people out there that are much better or classically trained actors. I don't know. But he was also Lonnie Elam in Halloween Kills. And again, very much a similar character. Reformed drunk, trying to do the right thing. And this guy, you're heartbroken when he fucking dies. And he's literally fed to do the father. It's terrible. And it's like, oh. I was not this emotionally invested in a lot of films that I really liked. Candyman was good. I was not that invested. Possessor was good, and there were some gut-wrenching moments, but I was not that invested. So this series and other characters like Riley, any other director, not any other, but a lot of other directors would have carried on characters like Riley to the end, or had maybe a few more surviving characters than who survived in the end. Mike, what's his name? Flanagan? Mike Flanagan had the foresight, and this falls into some subjects, some symbolism that I'll talk about later. Had the foresight to kill certain people off to propel the story forward. And some people that die do so in a heroic fashion. Some do so to propel the story forward, or as my wrestling friends would say, to get heat on the heel, which is what happened with Joe. So I think the as I mentioned before, they allow us to see what's coming so that we can then agonize over the consequences as they're happening. I know another thing too that I wanted to mention is that the characters really hinged on the performances. As I just mentioned, how important these characters were. They really hinged on the performers. There were no slouches in this movie. Everyone, even like the town handyman, that has not really a huge role until later, but everyone was on point. Everyone was good. Everyone really did a great job. Riley and Aaron were strong but vulnerable. They were, in a lot of horror movies, especially in the 80s and 90s, the heroes are flawed. It's, to me, when people debate Batman and Superman, Batman, to me, even though people say he's a rich dick who takes advantage of people that are mentally ill, I don't think that's true. But to me, Batman is the more heroic, or the one that people get behind more, because maybe in 1950, Superman for truth, justice, and the American way. Like, that doesn't exist anymore. What is the American way? Some would argue the American way is predatory. Some would argue it's heroic. And that really depends, as Obi-Wan Kenobi said, on your certain point of view. I don't think there's a uniform view there. I do think people know that America, or the world itself, is broken, and sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to really affect change. And that's what Batman fits to me. Now, I think that's why broken or imperfect characters are the best heroes for movies like this, because, as I mentioned, Riley and Aaron were strong and vulnerable. Their struggles, much like characters throughout the Bible, throughout history, throughout literature, it's their struggles, it's their imperfections, it's the passion of Jesus. He was strengthened through his torture. That made them, and it strengthened their resolve, and it prepared them, especially Aaron. She tells that story in, I think, episode 4 or 5 about her mother, her sick, fucking demented mother, making her clip the dove's wings. And her having to do that, to have the strength to do that as a child, and how it fucked her up. But then that's exactly how she fucking saves the world. She saves the world. She's like in a bizarro Virgin Mary. She's not a virgin. The baby doesn't magically appear, it disappears. And she doesn't birth the Redeemer to the world. She destroys the Antichrist, essentially, and saves the world. I mean, again, there are things that in writing notes for this podcast, I didn't even realize until I talk through them now. That is how good and how layered and how deep Midnight Mass was. And I hope this isn't like too back and forth herky-jerky for you, because with something like this, man, I honestly, the more I talk about it, the more I like it. And part of that is because the heroes were flawed. Look at Joe. Joe was a drunk. Joe paralyzed a girl. Had Joe not been killed and kind of sacrificed to Monsignor Pruitt, he would have been one of the heroic people, because he's had the resolve to come back from this horrific thing and pull himself up. Lisa, from the wheelchair, she walks, she's healed. This terrible thing that happens to everyone heals her and allows her to walk again. But now she's gone through all this terrible stuff. She has the strength to carry on. That is such a human story. Father Hill, Monsignor Pruitt, the guy, Hamish, what's his? Let me pull his name up here. Midnight Mass. Hamish Linkletter. I don't know if he's any relation to Art Linkletter, but Hamish Linkletter, I remember watching the series when John Draper was not quite through it yet. He kept saying, this dude's really weird. I don't know what it is about this actor. He's just really strange. But then as the series went on, it made sense. He was hiding something, and he was awkward, even in points when we shouldn't have expected him to be awkward. His reactions to things were a weird combination of poised and lost at the same time. Like he was sure, but he was never really sure of anything. He was a complete bullshit artist. It was perfect. It was a priest and a bullshit artist. And you got the sense through early dealings with certain people that something was awkward about him, but then as things progressed, it was like, oh, okay, we get it now. So whoever, Art Linkletter, not Art, Jesus Christ. I had my booster today, so I'm a little loopy, and I wanted to get this in, so I apologize. I made my notes between last night and today, because I don't know how much resolve I'll have tomorrow morning, and I want to be able to get this out for the first week. But Hamish Linkletter, just amazing in that role. The guy who played Joe, amazing in that role. Riley and Aaron, amazing in those roles. Bev Keenan made you want to bury her neck deep during low tide and just wait with a cocktail, creep show Leslie Nielsen style, and just wait for the waves to wash up around her head. Oh man, just an incredibly just grating performance. And I knew teachers like that. Teachers we suspected would do those things, those terrible things, probably didn't. Some might have. 7th grade math teacher. I don't know how many kids she ruined psychologically just because of how terrible she was. Yet if you didn't sing it at church, you were not a good person. So Bev Keenan, hands down. Lisa, the girl who played that character, had so much poise to be able to play someone, not just as a paraplegic dealing with being a paraplegic, but the range of emotion from the miracle happening to forgiving Joe, although still hating Joe. And again, self-sacrifice is another theme that I was going to talk about later, is sacrificing her own anger to help Joe get better and saying, look, I don't hate you. I hate you. I forgive you. I don't like you, but I forgive you. And if I can forgive you, there's only one person standing in your way of getting better, and that's you. And I watched that scene again last night, just kind of in preparation for this. And again, her performance is amazing, and so is his. But like, I remember we talked, someone asked us last week on a Q&A show for the Patreon members, what movies recently have made us cry. This series made me cry because the performances were so goddamn good. So kudos to them. Riley's parents were also really interesting because I knew people like these people. Again, it reminded me of that not homeschool. I'm not a complete weirdo. I love you, my homeschooled people. I had friends of you who grown up. You were a little weird, but we like you. But I had friends, like parents, and again, that homeroom teacher, senior year, who were so blind in their faith that they willingly would walk into a buzzsaw because they believed to a fault, their faith would lead them. Now, in these people's cases, Riley's parents, they're seeing these supposed miracles happen. and they see this thing that's supposed to be an angel. Now, if I saw that fucking thing walk through my church, I'd want to put a stake in its goddamn heart. I wouldn't think it was an angel. That thing does not look like an angel. Then again, hang on, let me pull up. What for those of you who are watching along, let me jump over here. You can still hear me. I'm going to share my screen. You can see what I'm looking at. All right, here we go. Let me adjust. So if you saw this freaking thing walking through your church, I don't care what church you go to, but if you see this thing walking through, do you really think that is an angel? I think not. In the words of Valentin Zukovsky from GoldenEye, I think not. I mean, it's a... And then the biblical description of an angel, though, to be fair, is not that much disconcerting. Like, look at this thing. Fucking monster. Enough of that. That'll give me nightmares. But again, to that point, if I saw that thing walking through, I wouldn't think it was an angel. Then again, with all the miracles you saw, it kind of sold the con. This reminds me of, there's a story called of Doc Noss and Babe Noss out in New Mexico. It's the White Sands Missile Range now, but there was Victoria Peak. And Victoria Peak, Doc Noss claimed he found all this gold and jewels and all this stuff buried in this mountain peak in the desert, and was selling all these claims, staked the claim and sold all these claims to people that if you would just give me money, you'll help me get it out of there, you'll get a piece of it too. Unfortunately, it was taken over by the Army, and it was either strip mined by the Army and the gold was taken and confiscated, or there was never gold in there anyway. And what Doc Noss would do is he would bring out these bars, and they'd say they were gold, but it was really either zinc or iron that had been discolored, and give them to people and say, hey, look at this, there's more down there, there's 1,000 more. And then you go back and you look through, and he was an old-timey foot doctor. He's a con man. So just like this, if someone just walks in with this big demon beast and says, this is an angel, let him bite your neck and let's all drink his blood, that's not really going to cut it. And Jesus in his time, for the story anyway, whether you believe it or you don't, in the story, Jesus had to perform miracles to get his apostles and followers to follow him. So similar happens here with the angel, demon, whatever you want to call it, vampire. So I'll give him credit. Some of my friends' parents wouldn't necessarily walk into the buzzsaw just because, but these people were hoodwinked because of the miracles that were done, the miracle, the healings, and things like that. And it was bastardized and misconstrued. That was the big thing. It's very blasphemous, and people even challenge it, but they have certain people in the congregation that help people along in their beliefs. So, I mean, it's really an interesting show, a tour de force, and it's very layered and it's very tied in. Mike Flanagan, or whoever helped him research this, really, really knows his stuff as far as the mythology of the Bible and the symbolism and things like that. And I think what really I think helped this along was relatable characters. As I just went through the whole laundry list, you either know them, you've heard of them, you've interacted with them, or you've seen people like this exist, whether in this form or others. Zealots, people into their own shit. But they're dealing with complex issues in a very modern 21st century way. We talked about broken heroes, but there's also the idea of self-sacrifice, as I mentioned. Lisa sacrifices her own feelings and puts aside her own grief over her condition and what happened. Now, she's helped along by getting her use of her legs back, but she puts that aside to help Joe, She sacrifices personal feelings of her own for this person. Says, I still hate you, but I forgive you. Get better. You're the only person standing in your way. Grief and the fear of loss is another big one. Loss of faith, misplaced faith, false idols. These are as old as the Bible itself. The golden calf with Moses and bringing down the tablets from Mount Sinai. Vengeance versus forgiveness, as I mentioned with Joe and Lisa. The biggest one to me was pride and justification. Because if you look at it on its face, and I know they made it pretty plain, but you may say, well, this vampire, he's controlling Father, he's got him desperate, he depends on him. But if you think about it, Monsignor could have easily sacrificed himself and saved humankind. Just the idea of martyrdom is very big in this, as I mentioned, tying back to religion. Father or Monsignor, when the angel fell upon him and attacked him and restored his youth, he could have seen this as an abomination. He read into it as an angel. It was his interpretation. His interpretation of that wasn't, I'm going to run fleeing and kill myself, because the thing would have been trapped in that cave. It had been there for however long. Monsignor's the one who brought it out in his steamer trunk and slowly, under the cover of darkness, protected this thing. But it was not the vampire itself and this belief in Jesus or God or the new covenant, as he called it, that really drove his intentions. It was his fear of death and his loss of his beloved Mildred Gunning. That was the doctor's mom who regressed in age. He was giving her communion at her bedside. And it was the woman that he loved. And even she finally gets through to him and says, this is not the message that I believed, and that you believed in the thing that we share together. There was this relationship between the two that had always been this unspoken thing, because he couldn't give up the vow. But that's what it was. His fear of losing her, his fear of death, his own selfish ambitions are what drove the events of the film. It wasn't a vampire infestation. And I'll talk about John Carpenter's vampires in another episode, probably this month or next month, because it is very similar in the themes that are connected to religion. Two religious vampire movies that are very, very fucking good. But it wasn't as simple as, hey, it's a vampire infestation, they're preying on these people. It was Monsignor's doing. And he had the choice. He had the choice in front of him to sacrifice himself to save mankind, as Jesus did, as the story goes. Suffer and sacrifice can lead to the redemption of the entire world, right? Well, the Monsignor he wasn't doing this to save the world. He was doing this to prolong this tryst or this relationship and not see her suffer and not see her die, which is a very human thing. I watched my grandmother get ravaged by dementia or Alzheimer's for 13 years. It's terrible. I watched my grandfather get sick. My uncle last year in September, around the time this movie came out, he went to the hospital and his heart stopped and he stopped breathing for a number of minutes, and it's a miracle, but he's alive. He was at Christmas dinner. That could be seen as a miracle. There's no reason. I mean, he was dead. He was gone. They can't explain why he had not been breathing and his brain wasn't gone. And from what I've talked to him, doesn't seem to be much brain damage, or he didn't lose a step. It's amazing. So, and those are really, again, these are simple people, relatable people, dealing with very simple themes in a 21st century way. And one good thing about this, as I mentioned here, Father Pruitt, it was his doing, his selfishness. He couldn't do what was asked of Jesus Christ. But you know who did? Aaron. As I mentioned, she could be looked at as the kind of the bizarro Mary in this situation, where she saves the world not by birthing the Savior, but by being the Savior and sacrificing herself. So I guess Jesus. She's Jesus and Mary all rolled into one. If God can be the whole, if Jesus can be God and be himself, then she can be Jesus and Mary at the same time. Hey, I've had other leaps of faith that have been harder to cross. But Midnight Mass, they're really examining issues about our society. And this, to me, is one of the keys of it as well. It wasn't as much as it could have been alienating to religious people watching this. They were able to deal with issues pertaining to society, the church, religion, faith, in the 21st century without prejudice. They weren't picking a side and saying the church is antiquated, the church is evil, right? They weren't saying the church is the way, this winged demon needs to be hunted down by, holy people. They were good, faithful people, just misguided. There were evil, faithful people. There were good, agnostic people. They did the South Park thing where they look at it from all these different avenues, and there's not one universal truth. It really is without prejudice. And what I mean by that is, let's look at Candyman. Candyman was a big one. Really had a message, had a point of view. Beautiful film. Ending was really, really good and cathartic after what had happened in the movie. But it had a platform. It had a stance, right? This film was able to do that. The characters, though, had preachy moments. The movie itself didn't, if that makes sense. The film didn't take a political stance. And there's a great interview by John Carpenter, and hey, it's Halloween 365, so if you don't like me referencing Carpenter a lot, then I don't know if this is the channel for you. But Carpenter once was asked about themes in his movie, or messages. That's what messages. He said, I don't have messages in my movies, I have themes. There are themes to things, but it's pretentious to foist this message upon people. And I think with today's day and age, with social justice causes and white knighting being very performative, especially with social media and, I know it's an overused term, but cancel culture, which is a real thing in some cases. Sometimes it's used as a red herring and a scapegoat. But with the age we live in, with instant agency, with cosplay agency in some cases, I think it's easy to fall into that trapping of this is what I feel and this is what my film says. Because it's art. It's in some ways it's going to. But there's a way you can do that and approach this from all sides without alienating the people that are watching, except maybe religious people who will find this terrible. But it doesn't really take a side or a stance. As I meant, the way I tried to crystallize it is it allows the characters in times. So like Riley really goes in on the priest about why there is no God. Aaron tries to pull him back from the edge while at the same time kind of agreeing in some ways with him. And the priest says that he's wrong or misguided, and although he can't explain why, his faith gets him through those gaps. So, and then Beverly, and there's all these different points of view. The Muslim, there's an argument with Sheriff. I keep calling him Sheriff, for God's sakes. What's his name? Sheriff Hassan, okay. So Sheriff Hassan has an interaction at the school because his son brings home a Bible that was given to him by one of the teachers. And he argues with Bev because he doesn't think it's right. And there's such a great moment in the argument where she says, he says something about, how would you feel if, a copy of the Quran was given out to the students? She says, I don't really think a school is the place to be discussing religious matters. And he says, there you have it. And because of what's going on in the background, she continues to push. they tell again Catholic, faithful, lapsed, agnostic, atheist. They run the gamut, and they sprinkle in all those ideas, but they never really take a side. Except for these people are fucked up for what they did, right? So, again, I think it really didn't have to skate any lines because of that. And I think that's why it didn't have as much blowback. Because it really didn't pick a side. It was politically agnostic. It was religious agnostic. It was just a terrible thing that happened with people. And again, you could even get around that with religious people by saying, these were people who are blaspheming, and if you're religious, this was an abomination of what is taught. So I think they did a really good job with treading those lines and telling those stories and showcasing and shedding light on different points of view without telling you what to believe or how to think. And wrapping this up, I've talked about the characters and the performances. I've talked about some of the subject matter. But the most important part of the series to me, and the biggest revelation, was the juxtaposition of angels with vampires. It's probably been talked about before, and I know I read an article saying that this might be tied back to the fallen angel theory for the Book of Enoch, I think it is. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone tie these two things together in the way that it was done here. Right, like Dan Brown has Angels and Demons, and I think, who was it? Was it Dracula 2000, where they talk about Judas Iscariot maybe being the first vampire? And that was his punishment, was to roam the world after committing suicide for betraying Christ. That now he was the first vampire. I think, other than that, I haven't seen any directly saying, "Hey, here's a vampire." Has a lot in common with an angel. And think of the iconography as far as religion is concerned. And it's funny, when I was typing my notes out that I'd been sketching down for this episode, I almost felt like I was writing a sermon in a way, just because of some of the parallels that I was drawing and the themes we're tackling in this series. But again, to me, the most amazing part of this is it's 2021. You've got a movie that started out feeling very much like a Stephen King film. Book, story, miniseries. But by the end, it was something completely original. And it's another King-ism is, Stephen King says there's no original ideas, but like one thing he will do is, there's been a lot of things that have been done. It's hard to be original, but you can take 2 or 3 different things and combine them and make something completely new. That's what was done here. This could have been like John Carpenter's Vampires, where there's just this lead vampire and he's trying to form essentially an army of vampires. But in this case, it was something completely different. It was tied so much into the mythology of religion, the Catholicism in particular. It's the word I'm searching for. And, oh, hey, it's midnight. Midnight Mass. And it's really hard to be original these days in 2021 with multiple streaming sites, with the amount of stories and books and creepypasta and films. Now, you could get away with ripping off old movies back in the 60s and 70s because people hadn't necessarily seen all the classics or early stuff. Now, everything's out there. Everything is out there. Everything is modern. Even if it's dated, it's modern. Like, I've had this conversation with John and Shaheen where we've talked about retro stuff, and one of them, I don't remember who it was, has said, like, how many people are really watching these movies and going to continue listening to podcasts? And it's like, there is such, like, this stuff is almost evergreen because every day there are kids discovering old music, old movies, old art. It's just, it always comes around, and these films are no different. It's very hard to be original in 2021. And Mike Flanagan was the writer and the director, knocked this out of the park. So, as I mentioned, just if you think about the mythology of the church, Jesus, the Transfiguration, for those of you who don't know, and again, I'm not going to get too churchy, but the Transfiguration is the point in the Mass where the priest holds up the communion and he holds up the wine. And in Catholic dogma, it's called the Transfiguration. It's when the bread and the wine physically become the body and blood of Jesus. It's not symbolic. It's fucking real. It's flesh and blood. I've always thought it was creepy. Always have. And apparently, according to the Catholic Church, I don't know if it's this way now because they're trying to be more progressive, but it used to be, those are one of the core tenets of Catholic dogma. And if you don't believe the Transfiguration, where they're magically, by blessing it, turning it into Jesus' body and blood, then you couldn't be Catholic because that's a core tenet, right? But just the themes of drink of my blood, eat of my flesh, you will be transformed, you will have everlasting life. The fact that no one's ever, at least in this medium, connected the dots between vampires and Jesus. I mean, I know people have said zombie Jesus because he comes back from the dead. But the fact that the main crux of this whole thing, this new covenant is, drink the blood, feast, and when you die, you will be reborn. And as long as we've had vampire movies and books, and I mean, shit, when was Dracula written? What year was Dracula written? Excuse me. 1897, publication date. Nobody's brought those two things together. Fucking fantastic. Bravo. My hat's off to you. Oh, I'm not wearing my hat tonight. Shit. You guys got my messy hat hair. Thanks. But even so much as the head vampire, because if you look at vampire mythology, and I'm going to wrap it up here. With vampire mythology, the head vampire kind of leads the other vampires like a shepherd leading the flock. And that's a direct correlation to Jesus. So kudos to everybody. Midnight Mass. It's, again, so fucking good. It is so good. If you watch this and you still want to go through it and watch it again, I think it's still worth it. I don't know why you would have listened if you haven't seen the movie. I gave you fair warning. I think Mike Flanagan's going to be a guy to watch. He's got another series coming up at some point on Netflix. His wife, Katie Siegel, is Erin in the film. Smoking hot. Just a cute, just gorgeous girl. Trying to figure out who. Not Alex Esso. She was cute too. That was Mildred. Who was the goddamn... Sorry, guys. I'm trying to find who played Joe the drunk. Yeah, Father Paul Hill, not Joe Hill. I knew that was wrong. Okay, so Samantha Sloan, Riley Kinnell. He's not on here. Jesus Christ. Come on. He's one of the key characters in the whole movie. Thanks, Wikipedia. I probably can't find it because I'm trying to find it. And should be talking to you guys. Anyway, that is my review of Midnight Mass. We made it through. It's midnight. I ended at 12:06 on the dot. More of these to come. Leave your comments below. If you don't think Midnight Mass was all that, leave a comment in the description. Let me know what movie you thought was the horror property of the year. And I know it's not fair to say the best horror movie of the year. Me and John talked about that before in our year-end wrap-up. But like it was too good, and it keeps getting left off because I think it's not a movie. People aren't talking about Midnight Mass in their list of top movies for 2021, and I think doing that is an incredible disservice, even though it's not a film. It's not fair to compare to other movies because of the length and the development, but at the same time, I'm almost speechless. I know I've talked for 30 minutes, so it's not quite speechless, but my God, this is so fucking good. If you have not seen it, or if you haven't taken a second look, or if you haven't told somebody about it, do so now. And I figured, what a great way to start off 2022 in this new chapter, this new covenant with you. Drink of my blood. Did I say drink of my flesh, eat my blood earlier? I think I might have. Oh, God, I'm getting loopy. But No, more to come. If I can do these weekly, not gonna be reviews every week, but reviews. I'll do the occasional, fix a bad movie, the reanimated concept where I talk about unmade films. I really like that concept, but I also know that it's limited. I can't do that every week. So I want to try to do about a 30-minute episode every week or 2 weeks if I can, and then maybe an occasional other episode. If you're someone who's watched my channel and listened to me talk about other movies from time to time, I want to talk about Star Wars. I think I want to review The Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett. I watched that this week, and I've got some good notes on that. So I'm out of time, though. But I appreciate you taking the ride with me. Again, this is where the Halloween 365 podcast is going to live. I will try to do some YouTube videos when I get the chance. With my workload and with doing Break the Apocalypse once a week, sometimes twice a week now, it's going to be very limited as far as how much time I can devote to editing if I want to get some sleep and be a good family man. So thank you very much for taking this ride, for sticking with me. Thank you for everyone that subscribed. Please share and let the word out. Full steam ahead. I'm B. O'Brien. This has been Halloween 365.